Glaciator 2.0, as imagined by Christina, based on the original synopsis for the episode. Noir quickly ducked out of sight into a dark alleyway just as his transformation wore off. The final dot on his ring disappeared, and a little black kwami flew out and rested in his outstretched hand. "Here you go, Plague," he said absently, handing a piece of smelly cheese to his small companion, who immediately began shoving large chunks of it in his mouth. "Well, Loverboy sure made someone angry," Plague said carelessly. Adrien sighed. "It's not funny, Plague. Ladybug seemed really upset. I mean, I know she normally gets frustrated with me, but this was different. I must have offended her somehow." He looked at the ground for a moment, then noticed Plague had finished his cheese, and he said wearily, "Come on, Plague, we'll talk more at home. Claws out." He took a deep breath as he felt the familiar stretch of leather surge around him, trying to push aside the sting that lingered from Ladybug's outburst. He rushed out of the alleyway, only to collide with someone who'd been running along the same side of the street. Marinette? She froze, as if startled that he recognized her, then relaxed and said, "Noir? What are you doing here?" "I was about to ask you the same thing. What are you doing out here all by yourself?" She jerked her head up, then smiled and said, "Oh, just getting some important ingredients. Yeah, for a special recipe I wanted to make for my grandpa. But he's very old-fashioned and only eats things if they're made a certain brand of baking soda, and most stores don't have it, which is why I had to come all the way out here to get it." Noir looked at her curiously. "But wouldn't most stores be closed by now?" Well, yes. Actually, that's why I came back empty-handed, because by the time I got there, the store was already closed. So I'll have to go back some other time." Noir smiled. "It's very thoughtful of you to go through all that extra trouble, Marinette. I'm sure your grandfather will appreciate it. I think I met him once. He seems to have quite a particular way of doing things." Marinette shook her head with a smile. "That's one way to put it." They stood in friendly silence for a moment, then Marinette said, "Well, I should probably get going. Nice to see you, Noir. Have a good night." She turned and began to hurry back down the street. Noir watched her go and shifted uncomfortably. He knew Paris had become a much safer city after he and Ladybug showed up, but he still didn't like the idea of Marinette walking the dark streets of Paris alone. He pulled out his stick and shot himself up into the air, then landed dramatically in front of her. "May I give you a ride home?" Marinette hesitated as she looked at his outstretched hand. "Oh no, that's okay. I'll be alright on my own, thanks." She moved to go around him, but Noir stepped in front of her. "Please, I insist." He winked teasingly, but Marinette noticed the earnestness in his voice. She laughed softly. "Okay, thank you, Noir." He smiled and carefully lifted her up before jumping steadily onto a nearby building. They soon reached the bakery, and Noir landed smoothly on Marinette's balcony, carefully setting her down before jumping onto the railing. Marinette smiled and waited politely for him to leave, but he hesitated and turned back to face her. "Hey, Marinette, I could really use your advice about something. Remember a while back when I told you that I'm in love with Ladybug?" Marinette glanced away uneasily. "Yeah." Noir lowered his head. "I used to think that by reminding her of how much she means to me and expressing my love for her, then it would only be a matter of time before she fell in love with me too. But now I'm not so sure. Tonight a supervillain wanted to prove that we were in love, and I think I was overly eager to prove he was right to Ladybug. Normally she just blows me off playfully, but this time she seemed really angry and annoyed. I can't change my feelings for her, but I also don't want her to feel bothered by them." His eyes wandered across the darkened skyline, then he lowered his head again and he said, Do you think I should back off and stop trying to make her fall in love with me?" Marinette jerked her head up, realizing he was expecting her to reply to all this. "Well, The thought grew in her mind. Here was a chance to finally put an end to Noir's teasing antics and foolishness once and for all. Yet something stopped her. Instead, she responded, "I'm really not the person to come to for love advice. In fact, I'm probably the last person you should be asking." She rolled her eyes and smiled apologetically as Noir turned to her in surprise. "Really? What do you mean by that?" Marinette stiffened, clasping the balcony railing tightly as she replied, "Oh, well, you see, there's—" He gazed questioningly at her, and she let the words spill out. "There's this boy I've been in love with for a really long time, but I can never find the courage to tell him how I feel, and even when I do, I manage to mess everything up." She threw her head into her arms against the guardrail, reminded of how hopelessly she continued to fail in her pursuit of Adrien, and was surprised she had said so much to Cat Noir. Cat Noir looked over at her sympathetically. "Seems like you have the opposite problem." He thought for a moment, then brightened and said, "Hey, maybe I could help. After all, this cat's an expert at love confessions." Marinette looked up doubtfully, but Cat Noir's enthusiasm was catching. He swung his legs over the railing and landed energetically on the balcony. "Come on, it'll be fun." Marinette sighed grudgingly, but couldn't help grinning. "Okay, so what should I do?" "Just speak from your heart." Marinette let out a groan. "I've tried that. Whenever I'm around him, I get all flustered and nothing I say makes any sense. I can't even think clearly." Cat Noir considered this, then snapped his fingers and said, "What you need is practice with the face-to-face part. You've already got the words down, so once you're comfortable saying them in front of someone, declaring your love will be a cinch." He turned and catwalked to the opposite end of the balcony, then slid his hand across the brim of an imaginary hat as he spun dramatically to face her. "I'll play your wonderful Prince Charming, and you can be the fearless, amazing Lady Marinette." She suppressed a giggle as Cat Noir struck another exaggerated pose, then decided to play along. The two of them practiced for almost an hour, as they came up with more and more ridiculous scenarios where Marinette would have an opportunity to express her feelings to the boy she loved. They got lost on a field trip, trapped in an igloo, sentenced to kitchen duty, and even kidnapped by an Akuma victim. Marinette was surprised by how easy it was to talk to Cat Noir, and by how comfortable she felt around him. Of course, she spent a lot of time with him as Ladybug, and he had truly become one of her closest friends, but she never really allowed herself to just have fun with him before. Usually when they saw each other, there was a villain to fight, and she couldn't afford any distractions. Her heart sank a bit as she remembered how angrily she had rebuked him earlier, and the reason Cat Noir had started this conversation in the first place. "Marinette, are you okay?" She quickly glanced up and realized she drifted off into thought. "Oh yes, just a little tired, that's all." Cat Noir smiled sheepishly. "It is getting pretty late. I probably should let you head to bed now." He gave a flourishing bow, kissed her hand, and was about to leap away when Marinette grabbed hold of his tail and pulled him back. "Thanks for all your help, Cat Noir. I feel a lot more confident now, and this was really fun." She smiled warmly at him before hesitantly adding, "I'm sure things will turn out all right between you and Ladybug." He gave her an appreciative look, then brightened and said, "Any boy would be lucky to have a girl like you, Marinette. Good luck expressing your feelings to—" He paused, then looked curiously at her. "Who are you in love with, Marinette?" Marinette tensed and stuttered awkwardly. "Oh, well, it's—" Her mind raced, and she tried to understand what was keeping her from saying his name. She knew she couldn't say his name to Cat Noir's Ladybug in order to keep her identity a secret, but why would it matter if she told Cat Noir as Marinette? Suddenly she realized what had been holding her back. She still didn't know Cat Noir's true identity, which meant for all she knew, there was a chance he could be Adrien. She almost laughed at the idea. Of course Cat Noir wasn't Adrien. They acted nothing alike. Adrien was gentle, considerate, well-mannered, while Cat Noir was playful, cocky, and audacious. Then again, there were times when Adrien reminded her of Cat Noir's wit, and she knew Cat Noir to have a gentle side too. She brushed that last thought from her mind and looked back at Cat Noir, who was still waiting curiously for an answer. She smiled slightly and said, "The boy I'm in love with is Adrien Agreste." Her eyes were turned shyly toward the ground, so she missed the look of complete surprise that flashed across Cat Noir's face. "Adrien Agreste?" The words seemed to catch in his throat, and he quickly turned to face the night sky. "Well, I should get going. Good night, Marinette." He smiled weakly at her, then jumped to the nearest rooftop. Marinette felt guilty once more as she watched the lonely figure begin to blend into the dark shadows of the Paris skyline. She glanced over at the red kwami that had appeared beside her, and almost without thinking she murmured, "Spatsan." A magical pink glow swirled around her as she transformed into her superhero form. She grabbed her yo-yo from her waist and threw it as far as possible before pulling herself up high into the air. It didn't take long for her to catch up to him, as he had been moving at a much slower, almost half-hearted pace. "Cat Noir!" She winced, knowing how loud her voice must sound against the nighttime hum of the city, but she hoped there were enough cars out that her words wouldn't draw too much attention. Besides, she thought, this was important. "Cat Noir!" She called again, and this time she saw his head turn back in surprise. "Ladybug?" He redirected his stick and swung himself onto an empty rooftop where Ladybug soon landed beside him. "Is something wrong, m'lady?" he asked, then flinched timidly. "Or do you not want me to call you that?" Ladybug looked down, her cheeks flushed with shame. "Listen, I'm really sorry for how I reacted earlier. I should never have yelled at you like that, and I know it doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I'm really, really sorry, Cat Noir." She glanced up into his eyes for a moment, but quickly looked back at the ground. Cat Noir was quiet for a while, then said, "I'm sorry too. I don't let myself get distracted, and I'm sure it must seem really obnoxious to have me always trying to get your attention, especially since you're already in love with another boy." His shoulders slumped, and he turned to have a seat on the edge of the roof. Ladybug sat carefully beside him, and the two stared silently into the darkness below. After a moment, Ladybug said quietly, "You're not obnoxious, Cat Noir. A bit trying at times, but I know you mean well. To be honest, well, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't flattered by all the nice things you say and do for me. It's not that I don't like it, but I don't want to play with your feelings. I can't accept these things because my heart belongs to someone else." She lowered her head sadly. "The reason it bothers me so much is because I have to reject you every time, and I hate to see you get hurt." Cat Noir was watching her thoughtfully, and this time she met his gaze. "You're the perfect partner, Cat Noir. A wonderful person, and one of my closest friends. Your friendship is very important to me, and I don't want hard feelings to get in the way of it." She stared apologetically into his wide green eyes, mentally pleading for him to understand, but knowing full well he had every right to be upset with her after the way she had treated him. He stared back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he smiled softly and said, "You're one of my closest friends, too. I would never want something foolish I did to come between us, and I'll try to be more focused next time." He moved to his feet, and Ladybug stood up beside him. "But you know," he added, "it would hurt more to stop trying. I don't care if you keep rejecting me. I will always love you, Ladybug. And if you don't mind, I'd rather show it than pretend otherwise." He reached for her hand, and when she didn't pull away, quickly lifted it for a soft kiss. "However," he said with a teasing smile, "maybe you could soften the rejections just a little bit." Ladybug's cheeks warmed, but she rolled her eyes with a smile and said, "I'll see what I can do." The two began walking the length of the long, flattened roof toward the side of the building where they would part ways. "Still," Cat Noir said with a grin, "I know my sophisticated charm can be pretty distracting, and we wouldn't want a catastrophe on our hands." Ladybug shook her head at his persistent use of cat puns. "So, how about a code word?" he continued. "A code word?" "Yeah. That way if I ever get too out of hand again and you really need me to stop, all I have to do is say the word and I'll turn as serious as they come." "How about Cat Noir, I need you to be serious?" Ladybug offered dryly. "What? No, that's so boring. Besides, you say that too much already." Cat Noir held his chin thoughtfully. "Ooh, how about Mantis?" "Mantis?" Ladybug looked at him as if he were crazy. "What has that got to do with anything?" "You mean your parents never made you watch hours and hours of nature documentaries? It's a kind of bug where the females eat the males." "Ew, gross, no way." Ladybug grimaced in protest, but that just made Cat Noir grin even more. "So, if you ever feel really angry, just say Mantis and I'll back off before you take a bite out of me." Ladybug shoved her elbow into him, but hid a smile as he continued to list possible code words while they made their way to the far side of the rooftop. They chatted a bit more before finally saying goodnight and leaping off in different directions. As usual, Noir launched himself up into the open window of his bedroom, being careful to avoid the angle that could be detected by his father's security footage. "Claws in," he announced, and stretched his arm out as his suit disappeared in exchange for a small black Kwame. "Well, that was quite an evening," the Kwame said knowingly. "Tell me about it, Plag." Adrien plopped himself down on his bed, not even bothering to change his clothes. He glanced at the clock, which read 3:30 a.m., leaving only 3 hours before he was expected to get ready for school tomorrow. School? Marinette. He bolted upright as he remembered the time they had spent together earlier that night. He'd been so surprised and relieved by his meeting with Ladybug that he'd forgotten all about it. He thought back to when he had helped Marinette practice expressing her feelings to the boy she loved, only to find out that it was him, Adrien. He felt again the shock that came with that statement, and yet a warm feeling also began to grow in his heart. He only half heard the sounds of Plag rummaging through the cabinets for camembert as his mind slowly pieced together this new discovery. Of course, it made perfect sense now why Marinette acted so flustered and shy around him, even though he had seen her be confident and well-spoken in front of other people. It was because she was in love with him. Him, not Noir, but Adrien. His mind spun with the idea. He thought again to the time at her house, and of how her eyes had sparkled as she described the boy's many qualities to Noir. And to think all that time she was talking about him. "Pretty crazy how you spent half the night writing love letters to yourself," Plag remarked through a mouthful of cheese. Adrien rolled his eyes with a smile. "We didn't write love letters, Plag. Marinette said she already had the words planned out for months. I just helped her with the talking part." He smiled as he contemplated how much thought and effort she put into her feelings for him, almost like what he did for Ladybug. Ladybug. A sick feeling dropped in his stomach as he realized the full depth of the situation he was now in. Marinette loved him, but he was in love with Ladybug, which meant that whenever Marinette did confess her feelings to him, he would have to explain to her that his heart already belonged to someone else. Oh, Plag, what am I gonna do? How am I possibly going to reject Marinette? She'll be so sad and hurt if I do. "You could take a lesson from Ladybug, since that's exactly what she just did to you. Again," said Plag dryly. Then he perked up and said, "Hey, maybe you should give this Marinette girl a chance. After all, she clearly has a thing for you, and you did just get her hopes up as Noir. What would she think of your advice if the boy rejects her right away?" Adrien looked at him critically. "You mean I should stop trying with Ladybug to be with Marinette?" He tilted his head in confusion and uncertainty as he let images of Marinette play in his mind. He remembered the first day he met her. She had been angry with him at first, but that all changed after he explained himself and gave her his umbrella. Turns out she had kept it this whole time. He thought of the way they had danced together at Chloe's birthday party, and again in New York. He laid back down, and as he did, his fingers brushed against the small lump in his pocket from where he carried the lucky charm she had given him. A small smile grew across his face as he remembered showing it to her the time they escaped to the movies together, and how happy she had been that he had kept it. Marinette was so sweet and kind. She was always thinking of other people and trying to help them out in some way. Aside from Plaganino, she was one of the only friends he could really talk with, and she was always there when he needed her. She was smart and brave too, just like Ladybug. Actually, Marinette reminded him a lot of Ladybug. Adrien sighed. As soon as his mind centered on his lady, he knew that his feelings for her hadn't changed. Marinette was amazing, but so was Ladybug. Whenever he was around her, he felt like he could take on anything. Ladybug was a bit serious at times, but only because she had to be, and she joked around with him a lot too. She was compassionate, clever, courageous, and never ceased to amaze him. Even though she didn't have the same feelings for him, he knew that she cared for him deeply. They'd been through a lot together and had grown to be very close friends. For now, that was enough. And maybe, just maybe, they could become more than that someday. Adrien had tucked his hands under his head, and his face held a slightly dreamy look, which made Plag roll his eyes in exasperation. "Don't tell me you're still all hung up on Ladybug," he said irritably. Adrien shrugged, accustomed to his Kwami's lack of understanding on this matter. "You know I'm still in love with her, Plag. But she's told you a bunch of times already that she's in love with someone else. I don't see why you keep insisting on bringing her flowers and stuff when all she does is turn them down." "But didn't you hear?" Adrien said happily. "She actually likes it when I do that. The only reason she wants me to stop is because she doesn't want to hurt my feelings each time." Plag held out his hands emphatically. "Exactly my point. Why get your feelings hurt all over again when you don't have to? It would hurt my feelings more if I gave up on trying to win her heart. At least this way, I still have a chance." "Fine, but what about Marinette?" Plag said pointedly. The dreamy thoughts of Ladybug vanished, and Adrien once again felt a twisted pang in his heart. Poor Marinette. If only there was a way he could spare her the pain of being rejected, for he knew all too well what that felt like. He lay still for a moment, then an idea began to grow in his head. Plag was still talking, and had seemed to come up with a plan of his own. "All right, so you got a crush on Ladybug. So does half of Paris. She keeps rejecting you anyway, so what's the difference if you try hanging out with someone else's Adrien for a change? You could still flirt with her as Cat Noir in case that'll ever work. But if it doesn't, you'll have a nice thing going as a backup plan." Adrien sat up and glared at him. "No way, Plag. How could you even say such a thing? It wouldn't be fair to either of them, and besides, I can't be in love with both of them at the same time." Plag started to protest, but changed his mind and said, "So what are you gonna do then, smart guy?" Adrien sighed. "I just have to tell Marinette the truth. That it's not anything against her, but my heart belongs to someone else." Plag rolled his eyes. "Oh yeah, great plan. Just straight up turn her down and destroy all her hopes and dreams at once. Real considerate." Adrien shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I can't lie to her, Plag. Besides, if it's taken her this long to tell me, maybe she won't decide to do it anytime soon, and I'll have time to think of a different way to break it to her." "But what if your little charades really did give her confidence and she finally does say she's in love with you?" said Plag as he hovered above Adrien's head. "Actually, I was thinking if I do have to reject her as Adrien, maybe Cat Noir could go and help ease the sting a little. I know how it feels to be rejected, and perhaps I could reassure her in some way." "Well, wouldn't that be ironic?" Plag said sarcastically, though he seemed to find it rather amusing. "You have a better idea?" "As a matter of fact, I do, but you don't want to hear it." He sniffed indignantly and curled up on a pillow beside Adrien. Adrien shook his head and leaned back against the softness of his mattress. He hoped Marinette would understand. His eyes became heavy, and he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness. The last thing he saw before falling asleep was an image of Marinette's smiling face, and he wished with all his heart that he could keep her smiling like that forever. Thanks for listening. I wrote this story when we just had the synopsis for this episode, and I remember being so shocked when I saw the trailer and saw them going to the movies and the scene on the balcony and all that, which was super exciting. But I'm glad I stuck with this story and finished it anyway, because it was really fun and I hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.